عظمته ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على النبي الأمي المكي المدني الهاشمي الذي اسمه في السماء بأحمد وفي الأراضين بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين أما بعد السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. So continuing our discussion on Tarbiyya, you raised a number of different issues last week, and I want this to be more so a discussion, a two-way street. And from what I've realized, Dar es Salaam really hates the audience interaction part, but we will endeavor to try and get you to interact. So there were a number of different issues that were highlighted last week, and we concluded last week's session on this point, that the reality of tarbiyya of a child at whatever stage in life they're at, obviously the earlier the better, the underpinning theory or requirement is that you do tarbiyya of yourself as a parent first. If I'm unable to change myself, then I can't change my children. And this comes on a different level as well. I remember Ayatollah Mujtahidi Tehrani used to quote a hadith, Allah bless his soul. He would say, it is only the pure heart that influences the hearts. So he says, if you as a scholar or a speaker or a person that goes on the minbar or a person that teaches in whatever different way, if you do not have a pure heart, then the words that you say shall not impact the hearts. It won't affect the hearts. And that applies also to the tarbiyya of the child. If there is no purity in my heart, i.e. there is a disconnect between what I'm telling them to do and what I'm actually doing, then those words of mine will have no impact, at least at that spiritual level. Zahiri, they may do it for fear of making you angry, for fear of annoying you, but the moment your back is turned, now they will do what they want. The ideal or the idea of tarbiyya is that you create this child and you mold this child such that you can leave them to go out in the big bad world and they won't be misguided. They won't stumble. You can be happy. What happens is we focus more on financial stability. Say, I want my child to be financially stable. This child needs to have a good job, good education. And we focus on that. And we push as much as we can for those ideals. But we don't have the same fervor, the same passion when it comes to the ideals of the akhirah, when it comes to those godly ideals. One, because it's hard work. Two, because we don't know. Three, we just can't be bothered. It's small things by our actions, like attending the masjid. So I was yesterday speaking to KSIJDAR and a few other people, and they said the wilad of Imam al-Baqir that just happened, it was the lowest attendance they'd ever seen from the wilad of Imam al-Baqir here. but there were more people for Thursday night. So it's Friday. Yeah, there were more people for Thursday night than there were for the wilada of Al-Imam al-Baqir. Now, we take this example because how do I instill love of the masjid in my child and the importance of masjid and majalis and mahafil and all of these things that happen when I myself don't give importance to that? And at times I think of it on the flip side, I say, but my parents forced me to go to masjid when I was younger and I hated it. I hated it. And so I don't want to do the same to my children. And yes, there is a place for the hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen where he says that do not raise your children in the way that you were raised. For their time is different. Their era is different. They face different challenges. So it requires one to have a level of hikmah wisdom when they're addressing their children in the current times. But not all the ways that we were raised by our parents are bad. And at times that regimented approach towards coming to the masjid is the saving grace of a person. And that's just a living example, one that just happened the day before yesterday. That we as a new generation of parents do not have the same connection our parents had with the masjid. We come in and we're tired, or we go to work and we come back and we're tired and I can't be bothered to go to the masjid. Or I look at my child and you know what, my child needs their nap. Now, this child could probably be okay without this nap for one day. But I make an excuse because my own nafs doesn't want to do it. So I project the diseases of my nafs onto my child. And the projection of those diseases onto a impressionable soul is hugely detrimental. Because the child always knows, in the same way that a parent always knows when the child is lying, the child eventually will realize when their parents are lying or hiding something. So, through my actions, I do the tarbiyya of the child, not by telling them. Yes, I can set boundaries, loose boundaries, like do not put that Lego brick up your nose boundaries. Well, that's bad for you. But within those first 7 years that we were discussing, it's play. We allow them to continue to play, to learn. The next 7 years become more difficult, and the following 7 years are even more difficult than that, because the challenges change. And with each of those 7 years, the era changes, the technology changes, everything changes, and again, we have to relearn. But if we are strong in our core belief, then that projects on them. And we do have situations where you have very religious parents, extremely religious parents, but children become atheists. I've met people like this. Or extremely religious parents, zahiran, very religious parents. Only 2 children, both gay. And one an atheist. Like a double whammy that side. So what happened there? Part of it is the tarbiyya of the child. The other part of it is the environment within which you place that child. Because you can socially engineer the environment of a child more than you can, more than what you actually think. Can we turn this down a little bit? Sorry. There we are. So you can socially engineer, I'll speak louder. You can socially engineer the situation, the environment that your child is presented with. How so? Before they're even at the age of choosing who they want their friends to be, you surround them with whom you think their friends should be. It's very easily socially engineered. I want my child to only have friends that are from the madhab of Ahl al-Bayt, that have good religious parents. So what I do is I place them amongst those children. They grow up with a strong friendship and a bond with that child, and then they end up being influenced by that person. That's one. And I often ask these parents that your child became an atheist. What? Oh no, we were very religious, and I gave you an example last week as well. Majority of those families that I have met that had some sort of issue with their next generation in terms of their deen was because either the parents were too strict, or there was hypocrisy in the parents at some level. I.e., they were telling their child, if you remember the example last week, we go to majlis, we do everything, but the mother didn't even observe hijab. So there was that hypocrisy that existed there, that they were trying to make a religious child while not following the basic wajabat of the religion. Or then you have the friend factor. And even the friend factor becomes such a strong influence because when the house itself isn't. Another added problem that is very specific to this community, and I mentioned it in jest last week, but the more I've thought about it and the more I've discussed with people, it turns out that what I said in jest is somewhat a reality. And that is people handing their children over to the maids to raise them. If you get an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours out of 24 hours with your child, and then the other time that they're with you is maybe when they're sleeping, or even the maid takes them then, how do you expect to create a nation of believers with only 3 hours a day? So I can be free of the burden of having to raise this child. I hand it over to someone else. You deal with all the things. You see, those small moments where you have to clean the diapers or feed the child or wipe their face or hold their hand to do a basic task. Those are those fundamental times, especially in those first 8 years, where the brain is beginning now, from a psychological perspective, where the brain is now beginning to create those connections. It's beginning to now start to grow and comprehend its own existence. If at that point the parents don't have a strong role in raising their child, and raising the child is not, don't do this, don't do that, you go masjid, go learn Quran, and I'm not going to take you, the maid will take you. if at that point someone else is doing the bulk of the work? There are two paths that can come of this. There is one that they may consider you to be their parent. We're looking forward now. They may consider you to be their parent, or they may be more attached to the maid. And I've heard people say this. Oh yeah, our maid, they really love the maid, they're really attached to the maid. Okay, they're really attached to the maid, but there could be that aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, as they grow older, there is more and more cognitive dissonance from you. As they grow older, they're like, you never even did anything for me. So really, other than put a roof over my head and give me some money, but really, you never really struggled for me. Because one of the effects of having a child is that you begin to appreciate the struggle of your parents, that they went through to raise you. But if you're just handing it over, then at least on my level, it further pushes away me from my parents, because I have that disconnect. I'm not even raising this child. I'm not doing any of the hard work, at least. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if they're not attached to that maid, and why wouldn't they be attached to that maid? The one that is, in all fairness, raising them, doing all the hard work that a mother and father should be doing, why wouldn't they be attached to that maid? That would be because of what is being fed to them at home, in terms of the status of the maid and the help at home. And in which case you have another problem on your hands, that you have created a self-entitled, arrogant child who does not consider another human being equal to himself or herself. And so now what you've done is create a cognitive dissonance between the entity that is the parent, between another human being. Now you have this child that has very little emotional attachment to anything or anyone. So now how do you seek to bring that child back to the deen, when they've never been allowed to actually make a true bond with anyone? Because if they start bonding with the maid too much, we step in. No, you don't bond with them. If they start bonding with us too much, this kid's so annoying, maid, can you take him? I need to rest. Now I see some bemused faces, I see some agreeing faces, I see some quite angry faces. And that's okay. Because when our nafs faces a reality, it will present many of these different emotions. But that is the reality. If your child is being raised by someone else, then if they distance themselves from you when they're older, don't talk to you, leave you while you're old and frail, don't blame them. Because you didn't raise them in that way. There was no emotional connection. There was no attachment to you. So you have all of these different things, both psychological and spiritual, that you must navigate in order to raise this child and keep them upon the true path. And it's difficult. I was saying yesterday to I was speaking at the marriage seminar to the soon-to-be couples or husband and wives. And I was saying, have you ever thought of why it is that when you get married, you complete half of your deen? And then the Imam says, then have taqwa and struggle to get the other half. Why is it that you're given half of your deen when you get married? And all these years you've been struggling, praying, waking up, doing all these a'mal before you got married, and still maybe didn't attain half your deen. But the moment you get married, you attain half of it. And the reason is because the struggle of marriage is far greater than the struggle of being single. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew this isn't an easy thing. And then on top of that, you've got to have a child and the struggle of raising a child. So that's why you're given half your deen. Because look, what you're about to embark upon is tough. And then you have children, that's even tougher. It's grueling work. But as with anything, the more grueling a task, the more sweeter the reward. But if I'm not even putting myself under any sort of pressure, how do I character build? Characters are built in the furnaces of tests and trials. But if I cotton wool myself from every single furnace and every single trial by putting someone in between me and that particular trial, I can't even go shopping on my own. I just send someone else to do it. Then what character do I hope to build? And then by extension of that, how I project on my child. Because whatever spiritual defects that I have, a child will pick up on them. And so the first stage is that I need to work on myself. I need to develop myself to bring that purity of thought, the purity of action, the purity of speech within myself. Purity of thought being the most difficult. Purity of action is easy, purity of speech is easy, relatively. Because I can act with those two. I can act super religious. You know, I wear like a mashallah abaya, nice tasbih, lots of rings that even Thanos would be, you know, jealous of. Have all of them on and I'm mashallah. Al-Zahir, very, very religious. Go to the masjid, pray in the first line, have a big more stamp on my head. Zahiran, very religious. I speak very nicely. I speak all holy and, you know, but at home I may be a different person, or maybe even at home I can act the role quite well. But here, in my thoughts, that is a very difficult place to purify. See, I can act, I can do everything that I want, but if my thoughts are not pure, then that will eventually project. So it is the pure heart that influences the hearts. It is what we put as a priority in our lives that becomes a priority for our children. If the dunya is priority, I praise them more for those things that they have done within the dunya over the things that they have managed to do within the deen, then those are the things that they will have priority over. And there is a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, where the Holy Prophet says that when he was looking at some of the children that were playing in the street, he said, وَيْلٌ لِأَوْلَادِ آخِرَ الزَّمَانِ. He says that, woe unto the children from Akhir al-Zaman. Yeah? Says that, and they say, Ya Rasulullah, why? The ashab will ask, will the fathers of those children, will the parents of those children be mushrikeen? Will they be polytheists? And the Holy Prophet says, no, their parents will be mu'mineen. They will be believers. They will be believers. Come. Okay. They'll be believers. So they say, so then why woe unto them? You can't have this one. And the Holy Prophet, he says, they don't teach them anything of their wajabat, the parents. This is why woe unto those children. They don't teach them anything of their wajibat, of their fara'id, of the obligatory upon them. And whenever someone wants to teach them, they try and stop that. Or they want it to stop. And they are happy when their child attains something from the dunya, but not as happy when the child attains something from the deen. And then he says, I am far from them and they are far from me. I do bara'ah from them. I seek distance from them. What is it that we place importance upon in our lives? Everyone can sit and analyze their own life. What is it that I placed importance upon? What is it that I place importance on? Or if I've got children that are older and I look at them and how they act, what is it that I placed importance upon when they were younger? And then that itself will give me the reason for why they turned out that way. If more importance was placed upon cultural understandings, if more importance was placed upon sorry, it was just now I know how you guys feel. Okay, so if I place more importance upon those things, then it's going to manifest later. I need to have a level of hikmah in how I guide my child. So in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about inviting people to the path, and one can look at it as a way of inviting people towards the path. Look at our children, trying to guide them onto Salat al-Mustaqim, as that form of tabligh that the Quran is speaking about. So it says, "Ud'u ila sabil rabbik." Call people to the way of your Lord. Bil hikmah wal maw'izati al hasana wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan. So it says, use 3 ways to call someone to the way of your Lord. The first is bil hikmah, through wisdom. The second is maw'izati al hasana, through good words, through good guidance, through nice speech. The third is وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And if they argue with you, then argue and debate with them with akhlaq, in the best of ways. So there's 3 aspects here that we are told to use to invite someone towards the deen. The maw'izat al-hasana is straightforward. If we take it to the Tarbiyya context, then speak nicely to your children. Be patient with them. Speak with them to them with love, as hard as it may be. But have that level of softness to you in your words. Make sure you don't use harsh terms in front of them. And that in itself will aid a person in removing it if they're trying to stop themselves from, I don't know, swearing or cursing or backbiting about others in front of their child. Then that in itself is also part and parcel of that developmental phase of oneself. So make sure you only speak good in front of them. Make sure that you only speak to them in a nice way, so that they learn how to speak in a nice way to others. But if it's always harshness, then they will grow to be harsh towards others. The second thing is, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. If they argue with you, if they debate with you, then debate with them. No, don't run away from the debate, don't shut down the debate. It says, but debate with them in the best of ways. Debate with them in the best of ways. If they don't understand something or you don't understand, then okay, fine, I don't understand this. But look, let me go and find out for you. You know, sometimes it amazes me, some of the questions that young people come up with. Could never even thought of it, but they somehow in their minds, with that imagination, will bring up the most random of questions. And you have to learn how to deal with that. And this is where we have to have that level of fluidity within ourselves. Spirituality itself is fluid. Spiritual growth is fluid. It's a continuous stream. And that must also relate into my actions and my words, being fluid. If someone comes, I'll give you a very modern example. Someone comes and says to you, you know, this dua that you're reciting, it's da'if. There's nothing wrong with it, but no imam recited it. Now I could do a number of things. The first thing I can do is delete the clip. The second thing I can do is forward it to 300 other people in my WhatsApp contacts. Oh my God, look at this guy. And give him free publicity. Or the third thing I can do is look at what the person is saying and say, well, Zahiran, there's nothing wrong with it. Okay, it didn't come from an imam, but it's not a bad thing, right? Okay, fine. I can just be like, okay, that's your opinion, but I'll just carry on. Because I'm not doing anything haram. That's fluidity. We're rigid. We don't want to hear anyone else's opinion. Let people talk about their opinions. The only problem is that we're so afraid of other people's opinions or listening to someone else's opinions because we've built a house of cards on sand. There isn't any foundation to our own belief. And so the moment someone, and most of the time a child, challenges that belief, I crumble. I lose my patience, I get angry with them. Well, the Quran is saying, look, if they debate with you, they discuss with you, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. As they grow older, the questions might not be those annoying ones, but they might be, why am I not allowed out? وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Because you want to bring them. Yes, boundaries will be defined, but if they debate and argue with you, then do it in the best of ways. There is a time for harshness as well, but that will come to at another point. But if they argue with you, then be nice to them. They present something to you, an argument that you really can't, because your children are very good at presenting and mirroring their parents' faults. Very good. Maybe many of us did it when we were younger. Yeah, but you do this. That's what kids will do. Now, how do I react? There'll be two things. Slap around the face. No, you do not say this. How dare you say I do this? Or it can be, yeah, but it doesn't make it right. Now, how do I react at that point? We take from that reaction. How do we react to the new things that our children spring on us? If it's, speak to them nicely. Learn how to flow. Don't be so rigid. Rigidity comes at the far extremes of the deen, like the halal and haram. That's where you got to be rigid. We're rigid about things that are like, forget halal and haram. We're like rigid about, no, there has to be laddu on this night. That's where our rigidity comes. No, for everything else, there's not so much. But when it comes to the culture and cultural aspects and things that we have done, or that we do, then we're very rigid. And our children are growing up with access to YouTube and the internet, and they're just there hitting one video to another. Eventually they will reach someone who is giving them something that appeals to them. And if I'm rigid, then they will just bounce off my rigidity and go off on a different tangent. But if I can be fluid, then I'm giving another martial arts example, but I can learn to absorb their energy and give it back to them, plus my own. Yeah? This is that fluidity that we speak about. Being able to take what is coming and bear it. And this itself is another spiritual concept that is known as sharh al-sadr, the expanded chest. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Holy Prophet, Alam nashrah laka sadrak. Did we not expand your chest? Musa alayhi salam is saying, Rabbi shrah li sadri. My Lord, expand my chest. What is meant by this, expand my chest? It's like going from a 42-inch to a 46-inch chest. No, it's the spiritual ability to bear, to be patient. Rabbi shrah li sadri of Musa alayhi salam is that, my Lord, give me patience to go in front of Fir'aun and not lose my temper, not damn him, not condemn him, but to be able to listen to all the ill things that he will say of me and to absorb them and still talk to him about what is truth and what is right. The example of sharh al-sadr the ulama give is, imagine a sea. When you have a bottle of water and I take a ring and I drop it in, this water will begin to shake, water will spill out, it will start to affect its volume, it will bubble out of the container. When I expand this container and I take the very same ring and I drop it in, it makes a few ripples. But then this gets larger. Yeah, I can still reach that ring. I can reach down into this small little vessel, even though it made a few ripples, but I can still pull it out. Then it gets larger. You go to an ocean or a sea. And you take a whole plane and you drop it into that sea. Creates a few waves. Then it is still. And if you were to look at it, you would never be able to tell that there was a plane at its depth. If you try and reach it, you'll never reach it. The point being, the sea or the volume of the water is our spiritual sharh al-sadr, that ability to expand. The ring or the plane are tests and trials in our lives. The smaller the vessel or the volume of water, the more damage it causes to one's spiritual heart or chest. The more of it spills out. I drop the ring in, anger, jealousy, hatred, all splash out. Someone comes and says something to me I don't like, I make sure they know what I think of them. And it all spills out. But then the moment this turns into a sea, drop a plane in there, it's never going to overflow. There'll be some waves, but then it's calm. And there is no one better at getting under your skin than family. Yeah? Your siblings, or then your children. They know what will tick you off. And that's why the Anbiya of Allah even struggled with their own families. You know, it's not a definite art that I'm giving you that you will 100% know. There is, you know, you'll struggle and you trying as much as you can to guide these children, and then the rest is tawakkal ala Allah and their own destiny that they write. See, there is this sort of wing and a prayer type place where you just let them go. If they fly, they fly. They bottom out, you know, hopefully you'll be there to catch them. But you hope that in the early stages, you've aided them enough to be able to fly. Anyway, enough of the metaphors. I just realized it's just 3 or 4 metaphors back to back. So, if they argue with you, argue with them in the best of ways. The most interesting of all of these is bil hikmah. Shaykh Mutahari, when he is discussing this ayah, he says good words and good ways of arguing are constant throughout any society, throughout time. He says hikmah, however, changes. It changes from society, from country, from community, from time. What was right, or was the right way of your parents raising you 30 years ago, may not be the right way for you to raise your children. That hikmah must develop, must change. You must look for more innovative ways to make the masjid more appealing. You must look at your child and look, what is it that this child is, what can turn this child more towards the deen? It's not that one system, it worked for the eldest, it's got to work for the middle one and the youngest. So each one comes with their own personality, and each one requires not double standards, but a different approach to how one looks at you look at what their likes and dislikes are, and then you adjust the program of tarbiyya to them. This hikmah changes even at the same time from community to community. How I would raise my daughter in England may cause fasad in Dar es Salaam, because the culture is different, the environment is different. And so I must adjust. And so you have to look at your environment, you have to look at your culture, you have to try and see. And by culture, I don't mean that culture that infringes upon the deen and stuff like that. No, your paramount responsibility and requirement is that you must fulfill all of the obligations of the deen. And the deen must come first. And whatever of culture fits within the deen, we take it. But at times we do the flip. This is culture, and whatever of the deen fits in the culture, we'll take it. Everything outside of that, no, not for me, thank you. And so I don't want to hear the actual perspective in regards to the religion. And so when we become super cultural, it moves an individual away from the utilization of the aql. So it gets into that point of where I don't want to hear anyone else's opinion, I don't want to hear anyone else's view. I've known this for the last 30 years. There is no way that this person could ever come and tell me something that I don't know. So hikmah, like wisdom, like spirituality, is fluid. It must flow. And you must ponder and you must contemplate to see what is the best way to keep this child in the deen, on the deen. And when you say on the deen and in the deen, that will automatically solve all the other problems of, have they got good akhlaq? Have they got a good drive towards education? Because when you focus on the deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself says, I'll give you the dunya as well. And if by any chance they don't end up getting the dunya, but because you've given them the deen, they won't go into that downward spiral towards sin. Because that deen will always keep them uplifted. When we try and enforce the deen on our children at times, it is more of a cultural deen than the actual deen itself. Because they look at what we do. Now remember, if it does not go against Islam, there's no problem. So, yes, you can go and give laddus on whatever night you want. But don't think it's part of the deen. That's just cultural. And if you don't do it one day, or your child says, oh my God, why do we always have to have laddus on this night? Don't beat them up over it, verbally or physically. Because it's not part of the deen. It's a cultural thing which fits okay within the context of the deen, but is not more important than the deen itself. Does that make sense? If tomorrow someone was to say, there will be no laddus on this day, I shouldn't get offended. Because the whole reason of it is that I want to follow the deen and what this person did. But you see, we become so defensive over certain cultural practices to the detriment of the deen. And you look at all of these people that have grown up and become famous atheists from the community in different places, and you read what they have to say. 99% of the time it is just culture. They're opposing culture which they think to be Islam, but they don't know any different. So they've rebelled against culture, thinking that they're rebelling against Islam, but in reality they haven't rebelled against Islam itself, but just the culture that they were brought up in. And when they questioned it, they were told, no, this is how we do things, you cannot question it. And so then eventually they head out, they go head on out. And there's so many other different things that we could talk about. In the other sessions we'll talk about these small things that we do when our children are young, that butterfly effect into certain actions when they're older. And we do it within our own spirituality. If we're instilling laziness in them, we're not giving them a sense of organization in their life. Because with play, you allow them to play, but you can still start to instill organization in their life. And no better way of doing that other than the salah. The sixth Imam says, we Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam push our children to start reciting their salah at 5. But we advise you to start enforcing salah upon your children from the age of 7. And then he says, and then we Ahlul Bayt also begin, he talks about fasting. He says that from the age of 5 or 6, we start to have our children begin to fast. However, says if they begin to feel thirsty or hungry in the day, we give them something to eat or drink and let them do their iftar. We advise you to do that from the age of 7. Allow your children to start to fast from the age of 7. If they get too thirsty or too hungry, say, no problem, Baba, here you go, have something to eat, have something to drink. MashaAllah, you did really well. And make sure, you tell, my kid fasted today. Do you know he fasted? It may have only been woke up at 9 and fasted till 11, but that's how you work it. No, not like, no, come on, only 6 more hours, you can do this, don't disappoint Baba or Mama, please, other people's mums and dads are watching, don't you know that other boy, he fasted all 12, and you didn't do it, so disappointed in you. And that's another thing, and another discussion for next week, which I had intended, but then we went off down the rabbit hole of something else. But parental peer pressure. Then how do I deal with that? Someone else's kid is all shiny and clean and doing all sorts of things, but my kid just can't get past 11 o'clock without getting hungry. But someone else's kid is like going the whole way. And they're the same age, they're in the same madrasa class. I don't get this. Why is my child so damned? Your child is not damned. It's not a bad thing. So, inshallah, next week we'll talk about that, because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But how we deal with that. And by now you've probably sussed it out that the majority of the tarbiyya is of ourselves and how we approach situations and matters within our life that then will project upon our children. So that last hadith I left you, we Ahlul Bayt start at the age of 5 to fulfill the wajabat, or praying, getting our children to pray salah. We advise you to start from the age of 7. What is interesting here is there's no girls or boys. He says 7. Maybe because women are much more mature and able to, but it takes about 7 years to kickstart a guy till by the time he reaches 14, maybe he'll be regular if we give him 7 years. But girls, 2 years and they managed to get it. They managed to get to that point. And I guess it speaks to the aql. I was reading yesterday an article from Ayatollah Khamenei in regards to marriage and morality within marriage. And his final concluding remarks were like he was talking about the final responsibility of the husband and the final responsibility of the wife. And none of it was about what we usually think about. It was more on the esoteric level that he was speaking about it. And he said, the woman has one of the greatest responsibilities in her hands. And that is the one of being aql, being an intellectual, or having an intellect. He says, if you were to place the man and the woman side by side and remove all of the physical strength characteristics that a man had and compare just on the intellectual level, the woman would be far more intelligent and far more intellectual than the man. And so her responsibility is that she use that power wisely. With great power comes great responsibility. She uses that power wisely, not to manipulate her husband into doing things that she wants, but rather to use it to inspire him to be a better person. In the same way, that same aql can be applied to your husband in terms of how you want him to do the tarbiyya. Not like, you shouldn't be doing this in front of our child. But find innovative ways that we can sort of be on the same page in doing this tarbiyya. So we came off on that tangent because we said 7 to 9 is probably enough time for a young lady to establish these habits within her life. But boys, it takes about a good 7 years of kicking them out of bed for laziness for them to actually establish a habit. I think we'll end there. And if you have any questions, then we can move on to those, inshallah. Last week we did actually list a few issues that people were saying, like parental peer. I asked what problems do you perceive that children face, or you as parents face in raising children, and you'd said parental peer pressure, drugs, technology, i.e. social media and things, a-religiosity, i.e. they're just not religious, drugs came up twice, alcohol, aqaid issues. So if there are any others, do shout them out. If not, then just please ask your question, if you have any. Yes. Burnt out. Yeah. 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 It's a good question. I was going to say, to help you in that, get the husband to do some more. That's always a help. Now that burnout feeling just generally that an individual gets, you need to make time for yourself. In the sense of, although you may feel guilty that I need to give this person time or this child time, that child time, but you won't be able to do that with a sane mind if you don't give yourself an opportunity to just get away from everything. And if that's, you tell your husband look, I just need 10 minutes, or I need an hour, or I need 3 days. You keep the kids, and I'm just going to go and relax. And that should then be the role of the husband to understand and try and facilitate that. And we, at times we are, as husband, blind to the emotional trauma that a wife is going through. And many a times the wife won't ever speak about it. She won't tell her husband about it, because that's not the sort of relationship that they have. But actually, you've got to force that and say, look, hey, this is how I'm feeling. I need a chance to get away, or else I'm going to punch this kid in the face. So if you don't get me away, and you've got to be very open and have those open and frank conversations. There are other things that are not linked directly to spiritual, to Tarbiyya, but are about mental well-being from the A'imma alayhimus salam. Like, for example, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says that if someone's feeling sad and down and depressed, take them to an area of lots of greenery and let them just sit and look at that greenery. It'll make them feel happier. And so having those sort of breakaway retreats, somewhere to go, and alhamdulillah, you have beaches here, you have so many things that you can do. Even a 10-15 minute drive to go and sit somewhere quiet, just watching the waves, just for you to think, is very important. On a more spiritual level, it is difficult, but trying to find something that, a dua, for example, that you'd like to play, read the translation, just finding 10, 15, 20 minutes where you can just de-stress. And then obviously tawakkal ala Allah, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help at that point. And you will see, if you ask for help, that help does come. But yes, burnout is a very real reality. And we have to figure that into how we're going to raise our children as well. Yes. Yeah, so an extension of yourself is not yourself. Yeah, just having someone that prays or is Muslim. Yeah, we have this idea of da'is, we have this idea of witnesses in even in the seerah of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. But the bulk of that, I'm not saying that don't have maids or, don't let your maids handle your children at all. But in the case of like, okay, I need 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I handle, but the bulk of that tarbiyya must come from you. This is such an important thing. I guess look at it like this. And I've heard this, it may not be true, but from conversations that people say, oh look, if you've got someone working in the house, just make sure you lock away the money, it's just, you lock away the money. Yeah, people heard that. They're working there, they're cleaning, it's okay, but they're good people, but it's just in case, lock away the money and the gold. But the same person I'll give my child to raise. Going back to the hadith of the Holy Prophet, where am I showing the priority to my child? The dunya. Child, that person can't be trusted. So we lock away the money, all attachment to the dunya. But you are my key into the akhirah. Tafaddal. You go. So we have to understand that this child is so important. These children are so important. Many people will be dragged to hell because of their children, by the way. There are hadith. At times we hear, oh no, the sins of the child will not go upon the father, or the sins of the father will not. No, certain parents will be dragged to hell because of the lack of tarbiyya that they did for their children. And so, yes, does it extend to parents and grandparents? No, I mean, the very same parents that raised you will obviously have arguably the same ideals as you. But what you must look for, and again, it can't be long periods, just give them away for a few minutes and things like that, but so that you can de-stress. But you must look at the Islamic ideals. Are the Islamic ideals the basis of you giving that child to someone to take care of them for that period? But look at that example again, have a think about it. We lock away the money, but we give them children. Yeah. What is priority in our lives? Inshallah. But yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not saying deprive them of their grandchildren, grandparents or anything like that. Their answer, no, because this itself is also something that will create a spiritual connection for them. Why? Because this is silat al-rahim. This is keeping family ties. So you go so that they have that love for their blood relations. And then they are tied into that silat al-rahim. And they will continue to do so. So I think it is a good idea. Obviously, if you have a relative that is a bad influence on your child, keep them away from that particular one. Yeah. Okay. How can we raise a child who would happily be ready to do the wajabat and stay away from the muharramat without finding it a burden? We often, are these all questions? Oh, okay, sorry. All right, I've gone from the bottom one. How can we raise a child who would happily be ready to do the wajabat, stay away from the muharramat? Okay, who would be happy to do that? The thing is that it's that organization, right? One. And two, it is what they see you do. So every child wants to imitate their parents in some way, shape or form. They see you praying, they'll come and they'll pray next to you. Yeah? Or they'll start copying you, or they'll run away with your turba. Yeah? But how do I inspire that? I don't do it directly. I don't tell them, I don't need to order them directly. What I do is I make the action fun. So although the Imam says enforce from 7, he doesn't say, don't let them pray until they're 7. Though they're watching you, buy them a mini musalla, for example. Let them play around while you pray. You know, let them get used to it. Let them think that that is something cool. I mean, everything a parent does is cool for a child. They want to do it, even if it's, you know, taking your medication. They want to get hold of your pill bottles and open them and start eating those pills because you're doing it. Yeah, because you're doing it. So it has to be some way where you have to be you have to be a bit more relaxed. Come, Yansia. Okay, thank you, baby. There's not anything that will, you know, 100% make them happy, but there's certain things where you've got to be a bit more stricter, got to be a bit more relaxed. That's with anything in life. You know, there are different burdens that happen in life. She's just exploring everyone. There are different things that they will face in their life that will come as a burden. And if, you know, for example, the only thing we don't want to burden them on or with is the deen, then they're going to struggle with everything else. You give it to me as well? Okay, thank you, Mom. Okay. Okay. Oh dear. When you said let them be kids and let them do what they want until the age of 7, does that mean that we shouldn't even discipline them when they are doing something wrong? It depends what you define as discipline, right? I said define boundaries, very loose boundaries. You know, smacking them or shouting at them. It's not like we have a hadith that talk about it. Like if you, there is even blood money that is payable if you bruise your child, if you hurt your child. So, you know, that shows like, okay, there shouldn't be that physical sort of discipline towards a child, not in the extreme, at least. But yes, I mean, setting boundaries for them is good. But, you know, sometimes we have like, we want to teach them adab at the age of like 5 or 6. Like, don't say this in front of someone. We're trying to make them mini adults. You know, in the Victorian times, they would dress children as adults and they would try and teach them etiquettes and manners of an adult. And then later on, they realize, wait, it doesn't work. This is a child. Let them explore. Let them realize. Let them go through someone else's purse and pull out their child's toys. And just let them go. Define that. You know, obviously, if they're going in, no, don't do that. You know, have that no, but you know, don't let it be so strict that they eventually don't want to be anywhere near you. But yeah, define loose boundaries. How is it that some children go astray whereas the parents are religious and the environment at home is good too? That's a very interesting question. Because it's not just the environment at home. It's also the environment that you put them in outside. What school did you send them to? What other types of people and children went to that school? Whose birthday parties did you let them go to? Where did you feed them from? You might have been religious, but you took them to a place which also had pork and alcohol. You weren't sure about cross-contamination, but the food was nice. There are multiple factors that affect a child. And then we say parents are religious. Were they really religious or were they culturally religious? Was it true Islam or was it cultural Islam? The home environment was religious. What does a home environment being religious mean? In Muharram, they didn't watch the TV for 10 days. And they had a alam in the corner of their room, and they had a few zaris in one of the room, and they had a namaz room. but the father still spoke ill towards the mother? Or the mother was always backbiting about her husband on the phone to her sisters? Or they were both always belittling each other in front of the kids? But they had alams and zaris and a namaz room. So when we say a home environment is religious, what does that actually mean? Had a tile from Karbala, we had some turba of Imam Hussein, we have a big flag, or we have very nice selection of atar that we all wear to feel all holy. So the question is that we have to look at those houses again. How religious were they? And then the big thing is that what was their environment like? I know of some ulama in Europe whose children have become atheist. So that doesn't guarantee you just because the person is an alim, his child doesn't become atheist. But again, the question comes again. Yes, home environment was religious. But how stringent was it? Was it overburdening? 2, what about the social environment outside? What school did you send him? You sent him to the best school. But there were no other Muslims there. All of these things, they add up. Sorry, the phone locked. I'll go on to, there's one more question on there, but I'll go on to this one. How can you deal with sibling jealousy, specifically ages 8 and 4? Look, children are only jealous when they're made to feel in some way, shape or form like they're inadequate or the other one has some sort of advantage. I can't deal specific. I need to look at myself first. How am I dealing with both of these children? What is my approach? Yes, one is 4 years older than the other, but am I dedicating more time to the younger one than I am to the older one? So there's that. Number 2, you can maybe sit down with the older one and have a conversation. By the age of 8, they can probably articulate their feelings to you. And then you just reiterate and reconfirm that the fact that no, you love them equally and there's no issue between them and there's no reason to be jealous. What do they want? You love them. All of these words of affirmation. How can we raise a good child while living with grandparents when at times their behavior isn't very appropriate? Yeah. This is a difficulty. This is a difficulty. And probably, you know, if you look at the seerah of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, once they got married, they moved out. Culturally, we don't do that until like we're 5 kids down the line and there's really no more space and now we definitely have to move out. And even then it's a big drama. But what do you do? And it's very difficult to talk to your parents to tell them, can you not do this in front of my child, please? Yeah, we've all been there. This is something that you shouldn't do. The best you can do in that situation is actually try and, you know, talk to a child. Sometimes, you know, we have multiple discussions that we don't want to give our daughter too much screen time, because there's a bunch of studies and stuff like that that it leads to cognitive issues in a child that has too much screen time. The studies are coming out anyway, but but you know, that's forever a discussion between my parents and her parents. Who are like, can you please stop showing her YouTube? Please, like, just no phones, no TV. Can we do that, guys? You know, but it's very difficult because they're like, well, this is a simple solution. And it is a simple solution for us as well. Sometimes just sit there, turn the TV on, you watch these nursery rhymes or whatever, and just give me a break. But sometimes when it gets beyond those 10, 15, 20 minutes and it's now habitual and an addiction, it becomes a problem. So living at home, again, you've got to define those boundaries for yourself, for your child. Like, sorry, I know you guys like doing this, but I don't want to do this with my child. I'm sorry. And it is a difficult conversation. You can have it with, you say it with akhlaq, but at the end of the day, this child essentially is going to be your reason of going to heaven or hell, if you look at it like that. And its lack of tarbiyya will not come and be questioned from the grandparents or the aunts or the uncles, but you will be questioned for it. So at times you do have to define that boundary and say, look, I don't want you doing this. Please, can you not do this? I'll find an innovative way that you do it so it doesn't offend anyone. But yes, again, it's a very difficult thing. All right. Oh. Wow. Okay. Is it Jummah time yet? How do we deal with teenage boys who watch porn? This pornography is a big problem for youth today. It is. How do you deal with it? It's a very difficult, because it is an addiction as well, in part. So it's a very difficult thing. Let me think on this one. Let me think on this particular question. I want to look at a few other things before I give you an answer on that, and then inshallah next week. We have one next week, right? Sorry? On the 18th. So on the 18th, inshallah, I'll come back with a slightly more comprehensive answer, because it is a big problem. A few people have raised that. How do you ask your child not to do something they already are? For example, taking a stick and throwing on the floor, or hitting the TV, for instance. If you say no and they don't bother to hear you or purposely continue, how do you teach them to listen while having tantrums? Staying with in-laws, if you say no, they say, he's small, it's okay. How to tackle this? Yeah. It is very difficult when there are multiple people trying to raise your child contrary to how you want to raise them. And obviously moving out and everything is not an option for everyone. It's totally understandable. And then culturally, it's at times not the done thing. So how do you stop them from doing something? If you say no, they don't listen. If, for example, take the hitting the TV. So we had that 2 weeks ago, when we first got to Dar, because the first time TV was in reaching distance for her. So she was going up for a few days just looking, and then it was slightly touching, and she saw that the liquid behind the screen moved, and that was quite interesting. And then it was an almighty whack, and we thought, oh my God, she's gonna destroy this TV. So we're like, no, Fatima, no. And she's looking back at us, back at the TV, and we're like, oh God. So what we actually did is, every time she went to it and she put her hand to it, we'd just go up and say no, pick her up and move her away from it. That 2 or 3 times she got over it, she stopped doing it. So at least right now, like if you define that boundary, like, look, no, don't do that, and then present something else at the same time, like here's your toy that you like. to try and distract them from that. Tantrums and stuff, yeah, I mean, there is a bunch of stuff, like if you try and console them during a tantrum, next time the tantrum will be worse because they know that they can get away from it, get away with whatever they were throwing a tantrum about. Let them go through the tantrum. You have to put up with it. Again, we've discussed the in-laws thing. Define the boundaries with your family, with his family, that we don't want this to happen. You know how kids learn everything through watching? Now here with the system of maids, they would see us always asking the maids to do work for us. Would that give a negative effect? And if it does, then how do we negate this? Yeah, without a doubt. Create a generation of people that look towards others to do menial tasks for them, because they believe a task to be beneath them. Amir al-Mu'mineen had someone like Qanbar, was a slave, but he still went out and dug the gardens of the Jews to earn his wage. He would give Qanbar better things to wear than he would wear. He wouldn't, so obviously the role of Ahlul Bayt was more tarbiyya, wasn't that they were actually a slave, they took it. But Hazrat Fadda coming in the house of Hazrat Zahra still did, she would help in doing that. Obviously that's a different system between slave and servant, two different things. But yeah, I mean, at the very least, as a tarbiyya point of view, just get your kids to clean their room at least, not let the maid do it. They'll be like, yeah, she'll clean everywhere else, but you've got to learn how to clean your room, make your bed, because it all creates that sense of responsibility. When I don't have that sense of responsibility, or I'm learning to just put the burden on someone else to do it, how do we negate this? Reduce the amount of days that your maid comes. I don't know. Yeah? She comes 7 days a week now. Take it down to 5. 2 days a week you do the work. And let your kids see you do the work. Is it the right answer? I don't know. Do I definitely think that it will create a generation of self-entitled individuals? Yeah, probably. It maybe not happened for us in our generation. We grew up with maids and blah, blah, blah. But this time is very different. This is a time of self-entitlement. People entitle themselves to opinions, to a bunch of other things. That, if they don't develop that backbone of being able to take responsibility for things in their life, God forbid, their life as they get older, they end up not being able to afford a maid. But what are they going to do? They don't know how to deal with those things. How do you deal with phones with children? Yeah. There's a bunch of psychological research that is coming out currently and is being done. Even when I was doing my master's, there was some parallel stuff that was coming out from the department about screen time and cognitive decline in children, and also making them socially maladjusted, affecting their speech, their ability to speak, to develop, also their attention spans. And so you've got to, how do you deal with it is, you got to be on your phone less as well. Remember, they learn by watching. So if I'm constantly glued to my phone and watching something on my phone or texting, or they are going to want to do that as well. So you got to do more non-phone based stuff. Before phones were even a thing, when we were young, go out and play and go to the beach or do something else that will distract them from that phone, because at least in the early years, it is very detrimental. Screen time is extremely detrimental. There is some work being done on screen time and autism, and developing autism in children as well. But again, a lot of that stuff is ongoing in the psychological field. But yeah, arguably nothing good comes out of screen time right now, especially iPads and lengthy screen time. It can be an educational show or whatever you want, but it's not the same. The colors that are used, the ways, it's that instant gratification as well in personality. They want to watch this, then they hit this, then they hit this. It's instant gratification. I want this and I want it now on demand. So when they have to delay gratification, if they have to wait for something, they become impatient. They won't wait for it. They'll throw a tantrum. They'll do whatever, because we've brought them into this system of instant gratification. And arguably, one could argue that having someone waiting on you, waiting on you every single moment of the day would also create that instant gratification culture as well. Because, I said I wanted this juice and it came. Now when I have to go somewhere and I have to actually get up and get it myself, this is a huge burden for me. Inshallah, it's all these little things that influence the personality of a child, and ultimately it boils down to how we are and how we interact with others. There are no other questions? Oh yes, there are. Yes. Yeah, I mean, so this is not for like adults. We're talking about infants here and toddlers, and then by I would arguably say, I'll have to look into it as well. But even early teens, there is something to be said about the effect of it. But certainly from the ages of 0 to 8, extremely detrimental. Yeah. Yes.
What is your opinion on when we're trying to get our kids to do the habit of Islam acts like Hamas, and then rewarding them with monetary value like money or toys, or just getting them to encourage them to do these things? Is that a positive thing, or are we putting emphasis on, and then later on they won't do it?
Because they're not getting, no, many of the Tarbiyya stuff that the ulama in Qom are working on for children and stuff, it talks about this reward-based system. Like if they, so one of the ulama was saying that every Thursday night after the kids go to sleep, I go and I sneak some treat or something under their pillow. So when they wake up on Friday, it's like they look under their pillow and there's something there, and we tell them, look, it's Friday. It's a day of Eid for us. It's a day of celebration. When they are, I don't think it should be with every. I think Sid Mehdi Mudarrisi, maybe he was saying that when they were younger, their father, to wake them up for Fajr, would take honey and put it in their mouth. you know, and he would put it in their mouth so they would wake up to this sweet taste and say, okay, it's time to pray Fajr. Rather than, get up, you're always sleeping, what's wrong with you? So there's two types of tarbiyya there. And it would, you know, they would take some honey and place it in the mouth of the kids to wake them up. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, rewarding a child. I'd probably say, okay, look, start off with once, you know, if today you finish all your salah, you get this, and then slowly begin to increase the period, like then turn it to like, okay, if you do this 3-day block, we'll give you this, and then if you do a month, and so, you know, sort of monitor it. And you can even like create a chart for them where they sort of tick off the things that they've done that day. I made my bed, I cleaned my room, I washed my face, I prayed namaz, did zohar, did asr, and then at the end you can go through it with them and say, okay, yeah, I did 50 minutes of exercise or 10 minutes of exercise today, had 10 minutes on the phone, depending on how old they are, and then at the end you say, okay, yeah, great, and then you reward them for it. But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong. And in fact, I would say, like, make a big deal out of the wiladat. Every wiladat of the imam, give your children some sort of gift. And tell them it's the milad, it's the wiladat of the imam. Yes?
You mentioned last week a couple of examples of how you sort of project our skills and effects on your children. So if you have a child now who's like 14, for example, how do you undo, the examples you give are very like, you know, these are sure I have told them plenty of times. How do you undo that now and get that to really send to
Yeah. I think now, so from 0 to sort of 7, it's more action based, because they can't verbalize what they're seeing, so they'll just copy, and they can't really contemplate what is happening to them, so they'll just imitate. From 14 onwards, now this child is cognizant. So now you can call them out for certain things, but in a nice way, and actually debate with them. So I said, look, what are the consequences of said action? You know, you're doing this, and you know, what is the consequence? Like, look, if you carry on down this path, this could end up happening. You could have this negative effect. You know, you might end up being, you know, and so you give them multiple examples. So at that, to undo that, at that age, now you need to go down the logical discussion route. And then also at the same time, make sure that you're not doing it still. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much for your time. And, oh no, the sister left. This was hers. I've just realized. Thank you very much for your time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all and keep all of our children safe. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Please recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala